In the previous lesson, we looked at the demand curve, the relationship between the price of bread and the quantity of bread that a household is willing and able to purchase in a week. When you draw a demand curve, you hold constant all of the other factors that influence household behavior. Factors like the price of substitutes, the price of complements, household income, expectations, and so forth. You might ask yourself, how do we represent a change in one of those other factors? After all, it's very easy to show how the household responds to a change in the price of bread. You just move up or down the demand curve. But what if the price of bagels changes? Or what if consumer income changes? In that case, it turns out that we get an entirely new relationship between the price of bread and its quantity demanded. And once we have a new relationship, a new demand schedule, we have to draw a new demand curve. In this lesson, we will show how the change in one of the factors that we usually hold constant will cause us to have to shift the demand curve, that is, to redraw it in a new position. Let's go back to the original demand schedule we used in our last story. Here's a particular household, and this household has behavior that's represented by these numbers. At a price of $5 per loaf, they demand 1 loaf of bread per week. $4 a loaf means 2 loaves of bread per week for them, and so forth. These numbers representing the quantity of bread that they are willing and able to purchase at these different prices for bread. But suppose now we make a change in one of the factors that we held constant when we drew this schedule. That is, suppose now we change household income and make this household richer. Suppose their household income goes from $500 per week to $700 per week. The household is now wealthier. And one of the things that this household might choose to do with its newfound income is purchase more bread. This would be the case if bread is what economists call a normal good. A normal good is a good that a household buys more of when the household income increases. Let's suppose that bread is a normal good for this household. And in that case, we will get a new, higher quantity of bread at every price after income is increased. I'll write these numbers in. And to show that this is a new demand schedule, I'll use the symbol prime or apostrophe by the D to represent that this is a new demand relationship. Prime usually means new. We've got something new, so we're indicating it with this little mark. Well, here's our new demand schedule after the increase in household income. Now, at a price of $5 per loaf, this household wants 2 loaves of bread per week instead of 1. At a price of $3, this household used to want 3 loaves of bread, now they want 4, and so forth, all the way down the schedule. You will see that after an increase in income, this household wants to buy a larger quantity of bread at every price. And that's going to be important language for us as we look at how changes in variables influence the demand curve. So let's take this demand schedule and move it over to the board and draw the new demand curve in the axes that we used to draw the old demand curve. So what I'll do now is move all this stuff over to the board so you'll have it for reference. And I'll go back to the diagram in which we graphed the demand curve. After the increase in income, we'll see that there's a change then in the demand curve. For example, now at a price of $5 per loaf, the households want 2 loaves of bread per week instead of 1. At a price of $4 per loaf, we have a new quantity of 3 loaves demanded per week instead of 2. At a price of $3 per loaf, the quantity demanded after the increase in income is going to be $4 per loaf. Notice, the quantity demanded is larger at every price after income increases. This household now wants 5 loaves of bread when the price of bread is $2.50 per loaf. This household wants 7 loaves of bread when the price is $2.10. At a price of $1.80, the household wants 8 loaves of bread. At a price of $1.50, the household wants 9 loaves of bread. At a price of $1 per loaf, the household wants 10 loaves of bread. And finally, the household wants 12 loaves of bread if the price of bread is down to 50 cents per loaf. Now, are these the only imaginable prices and quantities for this household? Absolutely not. We can imagine price changing continuously. We can imagine quantity demanded changing continuously. And we can connect these dots to get a continuous downward sloping demand curve just like before. Here's the demand curve that represents the relationship between price and quantity demanded after income is increased. Notice that the new demand curve lies further away from the axes. We might use the language that the demand curve has shifted outwards. That is, after the increase in income, since bread is a normal good, the household wants to buy more bread at every price than it was buying before. The outward shift in the demand curve came about because we changed one of the variables that we had previously held constant. When we drew the old demand curve, we allowed price to change to see how the household behavior would change, how quantity would change. But we held income and the price of other goods constant. Whenever we changed income, we get an entirely new relationship between price and quantity. At every price, this wealthier household now wants to buy a larger quantity of bread than they were buying before. The increase in consumer income leads the demand curve to shift outward. It causes an outward shift in the demand curve. That is, the household buys a larger quantity of bread at every price. Now, here's some important language for you to know. Whenever there's a change in the price of bread, the household changes its behavior by moving along the existing demand curve. When a household moves along an existing demand curve, that is, when the household responds to a change in the price of bread, we call this a change in quantity demanded. However, if we change one of the variables that we previously held constant, income, the price of other goods, expectations, this causes us to have to redraw the entire demand curve. It leads to an entirely new relationship between the price of bread and the quantity demanded. We call this shift in the demand curve a change in demand. The entire demand schedule has changed. We have a whole new relationship between price and quantity, and that's what's meant by a shift in the demand curve, or the language, a change in demand. So, a movement along the demand curve is a response to a change in the price of bread itself, and that's called a change in quantity demanded. A shift in the demand curve is caused by a change in one of the variables that we usually hold constant when we draw a demand curve, and this shift is called a change in demand. In the next lesson, we'll do a complete inventory of all the things that can shift the demand curve, and we'll discuss how those various factors that we usually hold constant influence consumer behavior.